Moving on to worker safety, we talked a little bit about OSHA and workplace safety laws early on in the first couple slides of this lecture. Risk management is the broader term that we use when we're thinking about workplace safety, and workplace safety then becomes one sort of subcategory of overall risk management. In a larger picture, when we think about risk management, we're managing the risk to our company, to its physical plant, to the people, to our intellectual property. And so we want to make sure, first of all, that our workers are safe and healthy. So OSHA plays a role there. We want to make sure we've got good health and wellness promotion going on so that people stay healthy, they lose weight, they exercise, they stop smoking, stop doing drugs. We want to make sure we've got security so that people don't lose their, don't have workplace violence. We want to manage the workplace violence, but we also want to make sure we're managing the intellectual property of the company and protecting, the secure intellectual property and human capital that we have. And then lastly, disaster preparation and recovery planning. And I know those of some of you took the Management MBA 522 course with me, and we spent some time talking about crisis management and the importance of managing crises. But this is, again, you can see where it fits into the bigger picture, how important it is for companies to make good decisions in a crisis and recognize how to be prepared to make good decisions in a crisis. In terms of who is responsible for doing health and safety, and as you can see on this slide, there is a wide variety of people involved in workplace safety. Primarily HR works on the workers' comp stuff, health and wellness programs and drug testing, but a lot of safety training and OSHA compliance things and things like that, and that falls under the category of the manager. The manager is much more involved in the day-to-day issues of OSHA compliance and safety training and making sure workers are being safe. If you purposefully tell your employee to work in an unsafe manner and they get injured or die, you can be held liable for manslaughter or attempted manslaughter. Or perhaps if you purposefully told them that they had to act unsafely, you might actually get called for murder, depending on how premeditated it was. And there is precedent for that. So it's very important that you tell people to work safely, that you are not on record as telling them they can work unsafe and work around safety protocols, because in this circumstance where someone gets injured or hurt or dies, their family can come after you for murder if they want to. So the Occupational Safety and Health Act was developed in 1970, and the goal of this, of course, was to make sure that our workers were safe, that they were healthy, that they were not being poisoned or hurt by the work environment in which they were in. OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, administers the provisions and reviews the standards by which organizations are held in terms of keeping the organization to be safe. We have a general duty to our employees to make sure that they are safe and healthy and that the working conditions are appropriate for them. Even if the OSHA doesn't have a very particular standard that says these are the things that you must do, our responsibility as a general duty is to make sure it's safe. So we always err on the side of being safer than being more risky. That's the goal there. So OSHA requires us to put posters up everywhere talking about safety issues and health issues and making sure people are aware of their rights. So you should always look for those in your company because they tell you a lot of information. OSHA generally enforces standards on a couple of particular areas. Number one, on where there are potential hazards, where there are potential risks for errors. Next, on bloodborne pathogens, obviously things like HIV and hepatitis and other bloodborne diseases like one in Africa that I can't recall right now. Ebola, thank you. I knew it was going to come back to me. So things like Ebola, all these bloodborne diseases, we have a responsibility to ensure that we are protecting our employees from these bloodborne pathogens. So there are certain procedures that they have to undergo if they're exposed to bloodborne pathogens. We have to make sure we have masks and protective gloves available for people who deal with, in those areas. We want to also make sure people have protective equipment like hard hats and the appropriate shoes and radiation badges to monitor their radiation exposure and clothing to protect them. So if it requires a clean room and with a suit, an enclosed suit, we want to make sure that we have that. So all these things are required under OSHA. We enforce these standards for making sure people are wearing the right shoes that are non-slip soles and things like that. Cumulative stress disorders, even things like looking at a computer screen and using a mouse, and the cumulative stress that attaches with that. We need to let people know about what's the appropriate height for their seat and what angle should they be working at in terms of making sure they can use their mouse and those kinds of problems. And for people who work on the computer all day, this is a concern. The repetitive motion industry or cumulative stress disorders are a problem. Along with the physical problems is also the emotional stress, right? If we are also responsible for keeping our workplace as stress-free as is feasible, as is reasonable. Obviously, there's always going to be stress when you're working on deadlines and things, but if you have an environment that is overtly stressful and it's creating physical and emotional problems in people, then that has to be addressed. That's a problem. Lastly, we have to think about the work assignments that we give to people and making sure that they are prepared and trained to be able to do those jobs appropriately so that they don't make mistakes and they're not underprepared in being able to do it and they hurt themselves. So we have to be aware of that as well. So this is a flow chart just for you for observational purposes, just so you're aware of these things. Not everything has to be reported to OSHA. Honestly, if someone gets hurt and it's not something that they did on the job or from an exposure on the job, then the bottom line is you don't have to report those to OSHA. So you tripped and fell at your home and then you walked into the office. That's not an OSHA thing to record, right? Another thing, if you're injured in the job, then there's still a checklist that you have to go through. Did you die? Well, yes, then that has to be reported to OSHA right away. Was there an illness that resulted from exposure at work? Yes. Did you need something beyond a Band-Aid, done to you? Did you, when it came to an injury, did you lose consciousness? Are you now restricting your ability to move? Or, did we have to transfer you to another job because the injury did not allow you to do that job anymore? These are things that have to be recorded. If they don't fall in those categories, and they're pretty broad categories, mind you, but if you got a Band-Aid on your thumb and do you need to call OSHA? No, we don't need to call OSHA. A splinter happens, right? Or a cut happens, we don't have to call OSHA for those sorts of things. But when there's a death or an illness or an injury that really it's substantive, it controls or limits your ability to move or forces you to do a different job, if you lost consciousness or really needed like a splint or a crutch or something, then absolutely those things have to be reported to OSHA. This slide's just a really good illustration about the differences between what HR needs to do around safety and what managers need to do around safety and security. And primarily for those of you who are going to be managers, you need to monitor the health and safety of your employees daily, coach them how to be conscientious and conscious of safety issues, make sure you investigate accidents as they occur, being able to ask the right questions for people, make sure that there aren't any security risks where there might be, whether it's with your software or with doors left open, or people sneaking through monitors or lying and cheating their way to get access to the company. You're responsible for monitoring the safety and security of your company, your business, your resources. And you want to make sure that you're continually communicating to your employees and with them so you can become aware when there might be some challenging problems with employees who may be a little unbalanced and are not able to, that are not an appropriate risk for the company. Someone who might be off balance and may come back and do some violence, those sorts of things. HR is responsible for creating the systems and leading the investigations and creating reports and getting those reports sent out to the appropriate agencies. They are, and obviously they roll their sleeves up to do pretty much anything that needs to be done in terms of managing the recovery of the company from any kind of disaster. So, again, HR sits at that more strategic level and sort of deals with the overall investigation of things, and the day-to-day responsibility of managers is making sure people are staying safe, and you're the eyes and the ears for the HR department to know when there might be some potential problems brewing. Some of the most important things to think about with respect to safety management is, number one, making sure we've got commitment from top management to have a good, safe company and a good, safe good safety culture in the company. People need to be thinking about safety and need to be reminded about how to be safe as regularly as possible. There should be safety planning through all sorts of committees to make sure that we're all monitoring what needs to be done. And if you're in a unionized environment, this sort of thing happens through unions. But if you're not in a unionized environment, employees can still engage in these kinds of behaviors to make sure that they are safe and are being treated as safely as possible. We want to make sure that we are setting up appropriate policies around safety, and we have discipline procedures that we follow when someone isn't safe, and that there's appropriate punishments for that, and that we're keeping records on what happens and when and why, when it comes to safety issues. And then lastly, lots of training and lots of communication on these sorts of things. There needs to be continual blasts to employers about what's going on and why people need to be safe. While we've talked generally about safety concerns, the health concerns that we have are around things like air quality, and particularly if we're in an environment that has caustic chemicals, or there might be smoke exposure. Another issue around health and safety is about smoking at work. A lot of employers and states don't even allow people to smoke on the job anymore. And a lot of times, like for example, even here at SIUE, you can't even smoke anywhere on the grounds at SIUE anymore. It used to be that people could smoke, right outside the doors, but even for people who have asthma or reactive airways, walking through those smoke clouds in order to get into their building to do their job, it can still be a problem. And as someone who has breathing challenges, I can tell you that it's really hard to walk through that stuff and not feel your bronchioles spasming and making it difficult to breathe and to cough. So, I'm not judgmental because I'm an ex-smoker, but most of my lung damage is really around some of the exposures I had during 9/11 and the weaknesses that have come from it since. So one never knows, when my lung disorders are going to attack, given my 9/11 exposure stuff. So. Anyway, other things that we need to be worried about in terms of health concerns are emotional and mental health. We are responsible for making sure we are helping people to manage their workplace stressors, and we're not putting undue stress on them. Yes, stress is okay. Good stress is fine. We all need a little stress in order to get us to work hard, but the undue stress is really the bigger problem for us. And we want to make sure that we're not creating an environment that is overly stressful and taxing, such that it's causing people to get ill. General health promotion, aside from those things considered in the previous slide, also includes stuff like making sure people have healthy lifestyles, that they have access to exercise routines and health club memberships and things like that. Wellness programs are helping avoid problems before they become an issue. So we want to make sure that we're teaching people, how to be stress-free and how to eat healthy and those sorts of things. Lastly is employee assistance programs, which are much more focused on existing problems and helping people to get through those problems, whether it's emotional or physical or interactional, whatever it is. These health promotional programs are really about doing those sorts of things. General security concerns, as we've already talked about, are dealing with issues of violence, but also, managing our intellectual property, managing our resources, making sure our doors are safe and secure, that you need an ID to get past them, that we're doing appropriate screening of employees, so we're not hiring people who we know have history of violence or legal issues and things like that. And we want to make sure, if it's appropriate, we have the appropriate security personnel on site to deal with these issues. Banks have armed guards. Not all banks do, but other organizations don't have armed guards at all, or even any kind of security guards. So it really depends on the company and the industry they're in whether or not those kinds of things will happen. This last slide on potentially violent employees is a great checklist, just in case you are managing people and you start to see some patterns of behaviors that you think are inappropriate. And this is a fairly reasonable profile of someone who could be at risk for being violent, bringing a gun to work, and doing all sorts of damage. So what do you tend to see? You tend to see verbal threats, a lot of blaming of others, and not taking responsibility for their behaviors, lots of conflict, an ability to intimidate others or desire to intimidate others to behave the way they want, great upset over a minor injustice. Oh, you took my sandwich. Oh, and a major blow-up occurs, right? You might see someone who goes from very mild-mannered to really off the wall in in 60 seconds, right? I mean, they shift gears and they're really off the wall and imbalanced. So, is everybody who gets blames or is in conflict, does that mean they're potentially violent? No, but you start to see a pattern of behaviors, and this is just a really large pattern. So they'll be very frustrated, they'll have a long history of aggression and intimidation, they hold grudges, and they're very obsessive about things, and they don't let go of those grudges very easily. They're loners, they're under a lot of stress, or they appear to be under a lot of stress. They don't really have a social life. They are loners, and the only thing that they really do is work, and that's it. They're quick to temper, and they may have had problems with past violent behavior. That's not always the case. Sometimes someone just cracks and they become violent, but that, you may see some past history of violence and you realize that's not going to change. So these are good checklists just to keep in mind. It doesn't mean that the person necessarily will be violent, but it certainly increases the likelihood they could be. So always be aware of these sorts of things, and that's the kind of thing you need to be communicating to HR, that there may be some potential, some issues there.